Hello, everyone. Good morning and good evening. Wherever you are joining in from, welcome to the fifth night of the Tehran Summit, a platform for artistic resistance, radical thought, and collective imagination beyond the confines of borders and reductive forces of commercial markets. My name is Erfan Riyasi, and I'm the co-curator of this year's summit alongside Una Matisse and Yerede. This edition is proudly co-organized by BO, the Association of Visual Artists Oslo, and the new Center for Research and Practice. Tonight, we are honored to welcome Hito Steyerl, artist and filmmaker based in Berlin, whose critical interventions have radically reshaped how we think about image, politics, technology, and the infrastructures of power that frame our perception of reality. Hito's work probes the unstable ground between fact and fiction, surveillance and spectacle, presence and disappearance. With razor-sharp humor and conceptual clarity, she dismantles the architectures of contemporary capitalism, from military vision systems to museum walls, revealing the ghostly labor and the violence behind the screens we stare into every day. Her practice not only challenges the conditions of art, but reimagines what art can do, how it can hack dominant systems, rewrite visual codes, and stage possibilities for resistance in a world saturated with data and doubt. Please join me in welcoming Hito Steyerl as she presents her talk, Art in the Age of Authoritarian Chatbots.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it would be great if I could be that person you mentioned in the introduction. I'm afraid I cannot live up to this very generous description. Also, this talk I'm going to give is going to be very preliminary and experimental. In 2 weeks, we are having at the university where I'm working now a conference about tech fascism and AI authoritarianism, and I'm kind of rehearsing the sort of introduction I'm going to give for this. So it's definitely not finished. But I think there is also a deeper reason for why I think that talks have a hard time now ever being finished, and this is because of technology. I'm really in the process of radically also rethinking all the forms that I have been using until now because I'm getting automated. I mean, it's just a fact. I just released a book about basically image making in the age of generative AI. And of course, at the time when it's published, all the content is already outdated. There is no way, to keep pace with this onslaught of, developments in that field. And basically, one single meat brain cannot simply keep track of all the things that are going on. So I think, the age, at least for me, I'm sure there are people that are much smarter than I and can still manage, to sort of synthesize, analyze, and evaluate things very quickly. But for me, I think that moment is past. And I have to face the fact that any LLM can write a book in my voice in 2 minutes, almost. I mean, I'm exaggerating. Maybe in 2 years, that will definitely be possible. And that I also have to change my attitude and my perspective on trying to react to things. And at the moment, I'm rather seeing it as, evaluating and annotating things as they happen, in a very open mode, more trying to ask questions than to present, knowledge or anything that has been deeply analyzed, because I don't think that I am able to do this right now. And I wonder who is. I mean, I'm sure there are people who are, but also, so this is the reason why this will be very experimental. It may also be very short. I don't know. I haven't tested it because I started writing it like 3 minutes ago or 13 minutes ago. So let's just try our best, or try my best, which is the question, what could art be in the age of authoritarian chatbots? One of the first possibilities, I forgot to mention this, when even thinking about what to talk about in this kind of forum, was that it seemed very difficult for me to think of a topic that would be equally relevant to all the people that I imagine to be listening, right? So because art or the different art scenes in the world have changed a lot, I think, over the past decade or the past 5 years. And as there are so many countries undergoing difficult periods and being sort of immersed in their own domestic situation, also, in a way, the communication between all these situations has become much more difficult, right? And translation, in a way, has been paradoxically the more digital communication we had, the more difficult it got to communicate across different geopolitical or technological or national bubbles. That's also something that I feel is very much part of that moment. And I think, and I will come back to that later, that part of it is also technologically determined. So let's get into this. I think that age in the art in the age of authoritarian chatbots, I would like to use one vector to start talking about it. And this vector runs from the idea of generative art on the one hand to the idea of degenerative art on the other hand. So what do I mean by this? We have some idea of what generative art is. I mean, we all basically have witnessed the last 2 or 3 years with the emergence of so-called AI-assisted prompt generation, etc., etc. This has led to the rise of various AI-assisted artworks, the emergence of actually several styles according to it. The slide you see is an artwork by Refik Anadol at the Guggenheim Bilbao. In a more general sense, generative art as such is supposed to be made by protocol. As I said, in recent years, it has been mainly discussed in the context of so-called prompt generators or Gen AI. And there have been various discussions around it. So this is probably what generative art at this moment is about. So what could degenerative art be about? And what does it stand for? We know what degenerate art is or used to be, because this was a Nazi term that was made infamous by many big exhibitions starting in Munich that, made a point of exhibiting artwork that was unwanted in the era of Nazi fascism. For many different reasons, because it signified modernity, it signified basically everything that Nazis didn't like, I don't know, diversity, also a sort of realistic take on bodies, etc., etc. The organizer was actually one of my former colleagues, because I'm working at the same art university than the professor did who came up with this term and who made it famous. And my point is, why am I now trying to link those two, points in latent space, or um, in conceptual space? Let's put it like this. Because I'm wondering why the rise of generative AI cultural forms, whether they are art or not, doesn't matter, even including memes, etc., is correlated with the rise of a fascist adjacent right in many, many countries that uses both generative AI and analytical AI for its purposes. So on the one hand, we have basically a number of countries which are now governed by very reactionary governments. On the other hand, we have huge advances in both generative AI and analytical AI. And of course, I mean, this is not necessarily a new thing. Machine learning technology has been based on decades of the development of surveillance techniques, also on collecting data on social media. However, right now, a new stage has been reached. As we all know, in the US, a lot of data are being hovered up from government agencies to create mega databases that are supposed to surveil immigrants or people that have been naturalized by merging, all sorts of different databases which contain biometrical data, etc. An enterprise which is supposedly being assisted by the company Palantir, as if this was any surprise. And it reminds me, because many times people have said, well, I'm kind of apprehensive about the amount of data that, let's say, companies like Google, etc., have on me because I've been using this platform for I don't know how many years. But this is not going to be a problem unless there is a very authoritarian government, which now seems to be the case. And this is just talking about analytical AI. Of course, we also know that generative AI is a big thing for the current US government propaganda. The so-called Trump Gaza video is one example. The Studio Ghibli style deportation memes are another example. I don't want to talk about that too much because it's already getting far too much attention and oxygen. So in that sense, I think it's no surprise that several writers have argued that generative AI is the current style of digital fascism. And for me, the question is not whether that's the case or not. At this point in time, there is certainly strong evidence for a conjunction of these two things coming together. The question is just, is this incidental? Is this temporary? Or is the reason inherent in the technology itself? And this, of course, also coincides with a major rise in cultural wars from right-wing forces. I would like to use an example that is different from all the US-based examples I at least tend to hear a lot about. This is an example from Slovenia. This is the slide you are seeing is a campaign poster from the Slovenian Conservative Party called Slovenian Democratic Party, which is now in opposition but has initiated a referendum against certain types of artist pensions. The leader of the party, Janez Janša, who is a former prime minister, had previously said that classical art was being replaced by all sorts of degenerate, unhinged models that claim to be modern. And in Slovenian, he used the term izrogen, which is very close or refers to the German term entartet or degenerate art. So these, and by the way, the party won the referendum using this poster, which shows an artwork by artist Maya Smreka, who was the target of this campaign because the image of herself, her image of herself, basically nursing a puppy, was considered as being inappropriate or estrogen. So, as I said, the party won this referendum. There have been many, many similar campaigns in the last year and more all over Europe, but of course also in other places. And this, of course, does not only concern art, but also fact-based science, academia, and so on, maybe in a more even consequential onslaught. So as I said, this conjunction between generative art and authoritarian campaigns and government takeovers has been described by many different authors. My colleague Roland Meyer, for example, writes that AI-generated imagery has become, that's a quote, the preferred aesthetic of digital fascism. And there are other authors that speak of techno-fascism, techno-feudalism, that would be Varoufakis, vector fascism, that is Gregory Chatonsky. Paul Feigelfeld has coined the term of AI authoritarianism, etc. And the arguments differ in many places, but they also converge in one decisive point, which is that whatever reaction, extreme reaction, many countries are facing right now, this cannot be an identical repetition, right, of the different fascisms of the 1930s of the 20th century. And even those, were hard to sort of homogenize and summarize, they were very different, also amongst one another. So I think that it's not a good idea to start, arguing over these terms by asking the question whether this new constellation is really fascism or not, because actually no one thinks that, history is going to repeat in an identical way, because very simply, one cannot jump into the same river twice. So in that sense, I think it's important to focus on the new elements, especially, of course, the technological constellation in which such things happen. There are also undeniable continuities. The designation of so-called degenerate art is among them, or more generally, the designations of enemies of the people, whether that's in racial or ideological form. So I think all these questions have to be discussed, but one thing that should be avoided is sort of getting bogged down into a quarrel of whether this is really fascism or not. And this is why I propose very preliminarily a sort of very rough and dirty triage test, which has stood the test of time, which is the so-called duck test. That's just as a first, quick mechanism. And the duck test is this: if it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, and talks like a duck, then most probably it is a duck. And the emphasis is on most probably, which is not the same as being certain. But let's just note that most so-called large language models or advanced, machine learning models would solve the problem exactly in the same way, by trying to find patterns and assess probabilities. So I think in this case here of the slide of Elon Musk doing some kind of Roman salute, I think you can clearly see this walks like a duck and also salutes like a duck, I guess. But then it turns out that this duck issue is a little more complicated, because there is also precedent in this duck salute case, which is this. This is a cartoon from 1942. It's called The Führer's Face. It was a sort of American propaganda effort in the war. And it shows a duck doing the Hitler salute. And this duck is, of course, called Donald. And there are many details in this short cartoon which turn out to be pretty ambiguous today, especially the end, which opens up really interesting questions, because the story of this animation is Donald dreams he's a Nazi, he's forced to work in a weapons factory and follow a sort of Nazi schedule, and so on and so on. And he willingly goes along with everything. And then at the end, he wakes up in his bed. Luckily, he's super relieved, but he sees this shadow on the wall, which is doing this salute gesture, and he jumps up and does the same. But it turns out that this was just the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, and the sunlight fell at it from a certain angle, and this is why it started looking like this. Which I think brings up the counter question whether, in a way, the Statue of Liberty, or rather its shadow, whether the shadow of the Statue of Liberty showed this kind of Hitler salute all along, What is it? Is it basically inherent in the statue, or is it just coincidental? Is this accidental? Is this a coincidence? Is this a correlation? Or is this a causation? And people like Marcuse, for example, would say that for sure, the shadow of the Statue of Liberty contains the Hitler salute already in a kind of nascent version, that the types of authoritarianism we see now have sort of evolved out of the contradictions of liberalism and have been brewing for a long time. So I was just, throwing in this short thought experiment, which is also not 100% serious, because I think there are instructive parts, to be gained from it anyway. It does not bring any sort of 100% binary response, yes or no. It just brings up new questions and new ambiguities, which cannot be resolved one way or another. You can also use this test, to basically test different generators, prompt generators. It is no coincidence. For example, I hope you can read it. This is my attempt to get ChatGPT, which now contains DALL-E 3, to draw this kind of image. I said, please draw me a duck that gives a fascist salute. And of course, in so many words and verbose contortions, ChatGPT refuses to do this, because obviously the filters are set to trying to avoid this kind of thing. Now, if you would insist, you would probably be able to get it, but I didn't have that kind of patience. You can also think back of the Gemini debacle. Gemini is a model by Google, whose image generator was released, I think, around a year ago, and then people immediately started making images of Black and Asian Nazis. This caused a huge uproar, and the model was, well, neutered, maybe one can say, in the meantime, refusing, to take these kinds of requests. But of course, it takes only 3 seconds to convince another model to basically give interesting answers to some prompts. This is a result made with the generator Flux Dev. Flux is a German company which has been, whose model is now being used in Elon Musk's Grok system. And the prompt for this was actually, and here you can see another thing, replicate the news image in which Elon gives a fascist salute. And it gave me this, which is kind of interesting. And also this, which is even more interesting, because the thing in the background seems to refer to the former state logo, let's put it like this, of the GDR. So this model basically comes up with some kind of pictorial totalitarianism theory to produce its results. And Stable Diffusion 3.5, which has also always been my favorite model for its goofiness, and it will accept more or less any request. They just cannot decide whether Elon has 4 fingers or 6 fingers, as in this image, but will follow the request without any problem. So this small experiment reveals a number of things. Of course, the different models have different latents. They give different results because of their internal configuration, their sort of, internal taboos, filters, and so on. Some of them have more, some of them have less. And that kind of displaces the question whether this is fascism or not in different ways, because now the question is rather, how is it, what is it, and what does it do? And the thing that's clear, regardless from what the image generators produce or not, is that this rapid evolution of both generative AI and all these analytic data come at a time when the industrial power to basically make and deploy and control these models is concentrated in the hand of very few corporations, very few individuals, some of which make no secret of their extreme reactionary leanings. And we have also seen that in the past year, the powers of these systems accelerated quite dramatically, but in a very uneven way, which is also fascinating in itself. The models got very good at, or much better, let's put it like this, as things that they dub reasoning, which is mass and code, and everything else got subject to even more massive hallucinations than before. Hallucinations, of course, as you all know, is the situation when a large language model just makes up something, and that increased interestingly in the last few months at the same rate as progress in terms like code and mass. And I think that's very interesting to see how this split personality evolves right now in the models. Whether this will still be the case in 3 months, I really don't know. But there is a sort of schizophrenic tendency emerging in some of these models, which I think refers to the fact that not only is the instrumental rationality of the models increased, but also their instrumental irrationality, which I think is a very important term to keep in mind when dealing with machine learning, the instrumental irrationality of many of these models. Okay, so there is another big difference between the 1930s and the current constellation, and let me just stick with, the sort of metaphors that I've built. This, as you all know, is a very famous collage by John Hartfield, which was called Millions Stand Behind Me. And it was published in the magazine Arbeiter Illustrierte Zeitung, which was parts of Münzenberg's Kominterna financed, publishing empire. It was published several months before the Nazi takeover of power. And what you see is, it says, of course, Arbeiter Illustrierte Zeitung is the title, which is the illustrated newspaper for workers. The meaning of the Hitler salute, and then Hitler raises his hand and receives a big pack of bills, and the other caption reads, "Millions stand behind me," and of course the message is clear. Major industrialists like Krupp and Thyssen and Siemens and all the other big corporations, they stand behind Hitler and finance him. And today, this is no longer the case, because as you can clearly see, there's just no one standing behind Musk, and it's just not necessary for anyone to stand behind him, because he already owns these millions himself. And the division of labor between the investor and the politician has been abolished. The distinction between the businessman and the politician has been abolished, also between the entertainer and all of these other things, and even the distinction between the artist and all these other, activities has been abolished. It's now all concentrated into this one figure, because obviously this figure not only owns its own public space, owns its own, AI models, and has basically the means to finance it all. So basically all of these functions, which used to be different, are now integrated into one person, because also a lot of these activities can be automated or are automated. I mean, image production being one example, most obviously, but also the automation of the public sphere through, of course, all sorts of social media, in Musk's case X, of course, but also increasingly the automation of government in the attempt of trying to automate large part of government by systems, machine learning systems, an attempt which is not realized yet, but which clearly was the goal of Musk's Doge initiative a few months or weeks ago. Now, how this will evolve is anybody's guess. I'm just trying to state the current state of things. Might change tomorrow. That's interesting, that with the advent of machine learning and, automated prediction, everything has become completely unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen, 3 days from now or next minute. So, yes. And I think the juxtaposition of these two memes, the old one by John Hartfield from the Arbeiterillustrierte Zeitung, and this one also shows something very crucial, that today we have, Musk, but we don't have anyone like Willy Münzenberg, who, just to remind people who have never heard of him, was a very important publisher and cultural impresario in the late 20s and early 30s, mainly in the German-speaking public sphere, but all across Europe and also internationally. He was a member of the Communist Party, and he was financed by the Comintern, the international branch of the Communist Party, if you like. And they had not only built a political organization, but also a publishing venture or venue where these kinds of things could be articulated at scale. Even though in Münzenberg's case, that didn't turn out so well, because the party first turned against him and purged him, and then probably later killed him as well, because he was not very happy about the Stalinist turn in the late 30s. So what I'm trying to say, that this kind of counter-public or counter-organization does not exist today at any kind of scale or international level, which brings us back to the beginning, to my sort of puzzled state of mind when trying to think about an international audience, in art today. And knowing that, situations have grown so difficult and so acute and so different in many places, that it becomes increasingly impossible to talk about art, as one art. It's just no longer possible, which is due to a state of multipolarity we find ourselves in, which the art world has also become part of. The reality that there are many canons today, many centers, many sort of value systems, etc., in many parts of the world. But the interesting thing, just in this juxtaposition between the lacking Willy Münzenberg position and a sort of fascist public sphere, is that, interestingly, even in the reality of all these multipolar bubbles, there is no real system alternative, right? I mean, they are very, very, very different around the world, all these authoritarian systems. But as far as I'm aware, none of them questions the role of private property, and none of them has, so to speak, a system alternative, beyond the fact that one type of elite captures the state and start oppressing everyone else, whether that elite is basically oligarchs or a party or a religious elite, etc., etc., etc. So that's interesting that we start to be unable to talk to one another, but within these bubbles, there is no real system alternative difference. This is something which is really puzzling to me. there are no longer two systems, like this strange prompt generator suggests. But there is mainly more or less just one, just the type of elite which runs it is different in in all these different places. And this kind of Babylonian inability to communicate across these different bubbles with their different situations and urgencies expresses for me the lack of general system alternatives. Okay, now I have to make a kind of a cut, but and jump to a related topic. They are quite related. So the next chapter which I would like to open is what kind of articulation or what kind of rhetorics is produced by generative AI? And of course, there's not, I mean, there's so many that it's impossible to get a kind of overview, and also there is changing all the time. So the only thing I can attempt to do is not an overview, but an underview. And I will try to stick with just one example, which is the rhetorics of something which went viral at the beginning of 2025, and it's called the Italian brain rot meme universe. I don't know if you heard about it, but it's been quite big. And those are characters which are animated and produced by generative AI, animated by generative AI, made into mostly very short video clips. And then there is some kind of Italian-like music song that goes along with it, which mostly doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And it's a whole universe of characters. This is, I think, Bombardino Crocodilo. Yeah, Bombardino Crocodilo, which is a mix between a crocodile and a airplane. Miss Cappuccino, Tang Tang Sahur is another one, and this is Tralala Tralalero. There is like Marvel universe, right? There are so many plots and subplots and, you know, things that happen between those characters. It's quite fascinating, honestly. Just to give you a very short glimpse of it, I'm going to play one of these videos. This is Bombardino. Okay, I think that's enough. You get it. And I'm wondering, what sort of rhetorics is this? What's new in this? What should we make of it, if anything? And someone recently asked me whether I think is this art or not. And I thought that, you know, if something like this can be art, like Maurizio Cattelan's, whatever it was called, Banana, this is for me the original Italian brain rot. It cannot be more brain rot than this. This is for me bananino bananero. And of course, you know, if this can be art, then definitely the other stuff is art as well. This is really not a problem, right? But if you look into it a little closer, then there are very disturbing details. For example, this crocodilo character is defined, and this is a quote in the original video introducing this character as the fucking airplane that bombs children in Gaza and Palestine, quote finish. In this, in the original audio, which caused some uproar, but most people just didn't hear it because it's made in this, you know, very techno-like la la la. So basically no one really paid attention. But it also reminded me, you know, this Bombardino character, this one here with the crocodile, of the genre of aeropittura, which was a fascist futurist genre of airplane-based art, very much in love with, of course, warfare, like all the futurist things, but mainly with dropping bombs from above, and showing this also from a above angle. It was a whole thing that went on for almost a decade, of course, led and spearheaded by Tommaso Marinetti, the original futurist who also wrote the original manifesto in 1909. And he also was involved in a presentation at the Venice Biennial in 1942 of this kind of aeropittura painters who were involved in glorifying, the war from an Italian futurist point of view. Marinetti himself had volunteered to Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia in 1935, during which there was a lot of mustard gas, dropped on the civilians underneath. And also he published so many manifestos about how sexy war is that I completely lost track preparing this preparation. This is just one of them, the new aesthetics of war. This is a fascinating, sorry, this one is very interesting. For me, it's also a painting from this Aeropittura series, which, is supposed to show a person, a parachutist from above. But the thing I saw is actually the Bombardino Crocodilo character, seen from a different angle, which reminds me, of how you can see things, different things from different angles, and that they are actually both part of the image. Okay. So, however, I don't want to, the problem, I think, is not that there is a fascist lineage or futurist lineage to, the Italian brain rot series. In a way, it's kind of banal, because if my goal was to expose, some fascist tendencies in Italian brain rot and to claim that it's fascist, then I would, I think, have failed already, because it doesn't really matter, right? This kind of attitude or perspectives of trying to uncover something and then expose it and then create some kind of outrage, etc., has numbed people to the extent that today many people, which is part of the problem, really don't care whether they are called fascist or not. We had this viral trend in Germany last year where people would, sing along to a song that was called L'amour toujours in beer tents, and they would just exchange the main lyrics with Foreigner out. And, it was just, people just didn't care anymore whether that was appropriate or not. The idea, of exposure, outrage, etc., had just completely lost any sort of traction and value. So I think that, if we think of the rhetorics of something like Italian brain rot and its characters, is not, the thing is not, that it uses fascist imaginaries or whatever, even that's most probably the case. I think the matter is that it empties out meaning and language altogether. And it doesn't matter what's being said, actually, since precisely the point is that it's just edgy and crass, and that it basically lacks any meaning, or any word could be exchanged with another word without making it a bit, without changing anything whatsoever. There is this aura of, let's say, plausible deniability around it, which makes it kind of unassailable. And I also think that this use of language comes as a reaction to a period in which language was seen as something which has to be constantly, parsed for hidden meanings, and which were supposed to be exposed to create outrage and so on. And that created that sort of absolute numbness to this approach. And now, on the contrary, the idea is just to empty out meaning altogether, so it doesn't even matter what it contains or whether it contains anything in the first place. And the more outrage creates, the more preferable, because this is what makes it fly. It's one component of the fuel that makes it go viral. So now one last point, and this will be very short because it's really just a sketch. And this is about the role of operational images. because we could say that Italian brain rot doesn't matter what it is or what it says, whatever, but they do something. They are operational images, they circulate, they give clues about networks, about, people that use it, about attention spans. They capture a lot of attention, they monetize attention, and so on and so on. So this is what, these kind of Gen AI memes are also very good at. In this sense, they are operational images. This is a Wikipedia definition of operational images, referring to, I guess, Farocchi's definition of the term. It's an image that works, an image that does something, that performs a task or operation, etc., etc. And of course, not only Farocchi, who actually with Flusser developed this notion, has used it, but also Trevor Paglen, Volker Pontenburg, Jussi Parika, and so on and so on. Many, many different peoples have worked, to expand on this definition of operational images. So my last question, and I'm going to shorten this a bit, how does this apply now in the age of prompt generators, and also in the age of art, in relation to art, What can we say about operational art? Has art been operationalized just as any other sort of image? Has it been made to follow the same criteria of quantification, efficiency, deliverables, quantifiable solutions, improvements, and so on and so on? And that's something I think has definitely been the case. Art in recent years has been more and more made to be performative, efficient, change something in the world. The output has to be quantifiable. It has to be solution-oriented, like, for example, the current Venice architectural biennial, which seeks about adaptation to solutions for adaptation to climate change, and so on and so on. So art is currently made to also function in this system of operationality. And my question is, what would a non-operational art be in this constellation? And I would like to call it inoperative art for now. And this loosely follows the precedent that Jean-Luc Nancy said when he was writing about inoperative communities. And according to Nancy, community is not defined by its identity or its production or a lost origin that needs to be recovered. It is defined by, and this is now my summary, Nancy would put it much more elegantly and also with more nuance, etc. But if I would summarize it, I would say community is defined by the impossibility to make it work, right? That's the definition of community. You cannot make it work in any angle, from any side. And if one tries to make it work, then one ends up with fascism or one of its many derivatives, because then you have to start eliminating, all the people that do not fit the definition. You have to somehow get rid of all these people who pollute the purity of the community. So following this, line of thought, this vector, is there anything that one could say about inoperative art, an art that in this period in which many images, most images, especially generative AI images, are made to be operational, efficient, producing deliverables, and so on and so on, what could inoperative art be? And I realize I have now moved from degenerative art to inoperative art as its potential counterpart. And I would like to end with this question without being able to give any answer, because this is where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hito.
Okay.
Amazing as usual. Can I ask your question with a question? Like answer it? Answer it?
Sure, sure. You please go ahead.
Yeah.
Answer it.
I
Yeah.
had like originally I had a different question,
Yeah.
But since you ended with the idea of operationality and inoperationality, something that came to my mind is that in operational, in meaning it's defunctional and resists being paraphrased, or in a sense that formalists talk about it, that is like self-referential, it doesn't care about the outside world, it's just something that is in a sense like autonomous.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, that's also a question that I have asked myself a lot in this book, which is now already outdated. But, what is autonomous art in the age of autonomous weapons, or autonomous cars or whatever, I mean, how is this meaning displaced? And I have no definite answer at all, but yeah, I think one cannot really separate both aspects from you mentioned, On the one hand, refusing to work, on the other hand, being self-referential and divorced from actual reality. Maybe they are sort of sides of the same coin which need to be negotiated, but you're never going to rid of one of them entirely.
Right. If anybody had any question, you can raise your hand or write your questions in the chat, and I can read it. One other point, like right now, I'm working on this idea of using AI to create images, which I call it a speculative photography, which is in a sense like different than documentary photography. And um, and I'm talking about the idea of like world building and hyperstition and CCRU, like these like AI as a means to sort of create a new steering for the culture and for the society and everything. The role of artists, in creating new worlds, and AI as a means to create or sort of like imagine or materialize or crystallize new worlds. Because like this quote that you mentioned resonated with me deeply, AI as the preferred aesthetics of digital fascism. And I've been seeing a lot of banners in Tehran in which all the images are created by AI. Like all these like Ghibli style images, but done by the state, which has this like they're praising the supreme leader, they're like praising these imams, or the holy cities, like why we should visit the holy city of Mashhad. We have like the shrine of Imam Reza there, and they're all like most of them in this Ghibli style of this cute sort of aesthetics, but the message behind it is very brutal and like unironically. And I was thinking like how, like relating that to your talk about generative art and degenerative art. What's the role of artists um, and in this age of authoritarian chatbots, or can an AI become a tool of imagining new futures or new possibilities?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This harks back, to my uncertainty whether this conjunction, the current conjunction between authoritarian regimes in many different parts and generative AI, is this incidental or is it structural? And I tell you, I don't know. I mean, there are many arguments for it being structural because, these industries have a certain infrastructure, they are monopolized, they are opaque, blah, 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 and so on. On the other hand, I always remember, the enchantment of Bertolt Brecht and Benjamin with radio when it came along. They loved radio, they were experimenting with it, and so on and so on. And then along comes Goebbels and just captures it all, right? It's like, whoa, okay, what happened? But now radio is, something else altogether, and it's been reborn as podcasting. You could say that it has taken on a different dimension many times. So I'm not sure, is AI like radio? Do we have to wait for the long tail? Or is there something inherently sinister about it, you know, because of the way its industry is structured. I mean, it's not like as a painter you need a brush and a canvas and you know something to paint with, and probably also some free time, etc. But you know, the entry level to do it is kind of manageable, I should say. You don't even need a canvas. You just draw something on a rock or whatever. And with AI, you automatically are always included, integrated, captured by these large-scale infrastructures. So that's also the case. But how this will pan out is another question. For now, what we can see is this conjuncture.
Amir?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but it's so noisy, man.
Just give me a sec. Is it better now?
Not really.
Okay, I'll just start. I would try to like talk louder if that helps. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Hito. That was really insightful, and as for someone who's like read your work and has been really inspired, it's really gratifying to be part of this as well. And yeah, I was just like, it's interesting because recently I've been reading for a project your work on language of practice, and also a thing about you and me, and also rereading Benjamin's Language of Man and Language of Such. And I was also wondering if it's appropriate to kind of like read this predicament of art and AI and really identifying like the language of belonging within the language of practice of art, and how this kind of correlates with you know, our everlasting struggle to find an autonomous being of ourselves that can create this meaning, and running away from like nomenclature, like the thing you said about community. I was wondering if it is impossible because we are naming it, and and going back to Benjamin's like language of names, all right, and yeah, with in that case, with the like, is it time for art and its institutions to really come to the realization that we need to dismantle the auto institution of ourselves, right? That it's time to really kind of think about, like, even when we talk about role building, if you want to go about of like the self that makes it, we are really not talking about the other. And it's, and yeah, and always, as you said, like kind of point the doc and say it's the doc. It's no longer, we should no longer discuss and argue if it's the doc, but maybe then try to think of why we think the duck is the ignorant one, and really think of the duck as the animal and not the one, not the human that we are, that we're pointing on it when we think it's dumb, and but we really get closer to the language of things. Yeah, but yeah, that was my question. But overall, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this comment. I mean, I mean, it's very trivial what I'm gonna say, right? But I think that the automation of all these artists, of many of artists' activities, not all of them, but many, is something I have started to feel very acutely recently, right? And I think I will have to change a lot of things in my practice to kind of relate to it because it's breathing down artists' necks. And this is, I think, I'm not sure if it's new. Probably photography was another point, another rupture, you know, in traditional artist activities. But I think the change that is waiting for us now is in a way much more dramatic, right? And not only for artists, but for workers' leverage as a whole. So, I mean, if labor is no longer required at scale, let's put it like this, then there's going to be a need for a lot of social movements to reclaim any sort of say in how resources would be redistributed. So that's really another thing to consider as people, you know, in working in that profession. And until now, I've sort of brushed it off a little. But I realized that on the level of writing, I'm outgunned totally. On the level of, making films, I can hang on maybe for 2 more years, and that's it. So I need to come up with something else.
Yeah, I mean, all of it. Thank you.
All right. Is there any other questions? Yeah, Mattia?
Thank you very much. It was a super interesting talk. I wanted to ask you about, you said the definition of a community was that you cannot make it work. And then I was wondering, how do you define work in this context, like in this sentence? Is it about like you cannot make it work as it's not rationally cohesive, or are you talking about you cannot make it work as in a more work in a traditional sense? Yes.
I think, I was trying to really condense many things that Nancy said. He said that a community that is made to produce or to be productive is something that's supposed to fail, or it will, run into these very extreme dead ends. That's on the one hand, the community of workers, let's put it like this, problem. But the meaning I was trying to evoke in this shortening down was also, if you want to make it seamless, without any sort of internal contradiction, to make it functional somehow, to make it work, and not to, resist in all sorts, on all sorts of directions and vectors, then you're doing it wrong. That's what I meant. Yeah. If you try to homogenize it, gloss over its fundamental internal inconsistencies and heterogeneity. I mean, this is very kitsch what I'm saying, but I was trying to say something like that.
Thank you.
Una?
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess my question is sort of derailing from Mattea's question. I was thinking about what you said about how there's no longer something that's sort of in opposition to this like fascist billionaire rich man, and that we're currently like in this kind of one line route. And I guess my question is like, of course, more or less impossible to answer, but how do you see us possibly resisting this rise of like the fascist billionaire as like a mono figure, almost like a god?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we don't even have the infrastructure, which was a systemic alternative, an organization to represent it, and a public sphere to express it, right? So, in a way, this has to start from a very low threshold, let's put it like this. But maybe this also implies that one shouldn't estimate, the organizations that exist. One shouldn't underestimate the organizations that exist. For example, in terms of institutions, right? I mean, I totally agree that we need to imagine new institutions and so on. But the existing ones are also, under many sorts of pressure now, being attacked, defunded, and so on and so on and so on. So maybe there is something, to still be saved from that. Maybe having some kind of institution is preferable to having none. I mean, we see that especially now with so many universities being under heavy attack, right? So in that sense, wherever infrastructure and organization can be facilitated is a necessary starting point. And I think it's almost impossible to predict, which kind of way of organizing is going to be best. And I think here we can really learn from the AI industries, because how do they solve this kind of problem? They just try everything, and something is going to work, hopefully, right? And then they continue with this, but they try as many things as possible. And I think there is no no chance of avoiding that. There is no way of saying this is the winning horse and now we all have to bet on it. That's probably unrealistic.
Thank you. Pamela?
Hi, thank you for, yes, sorry about that. Thank you for your beautiful presentation. I've been following your important art for many, many years, and I have so much admiration for you. One of the things that I've been thinking about in recent months, especially because I'm an art historian and I write about art and dissent in Iran, is that as you just said, there's a lack of an infrastructure, and I call it infrastructure of dissent, particularly in the United States right now. And people look kind of helpless right now. They don't know who to turn to. They don't know what to do, what organizations. There are a lot of questions, and people just don't know what to do. And sometimes, these questions come up and people are like, so what do we do? And I keep telling people, well, look at countries that have been developing infrastructures of dissent for decades before you. Iran, especially because this event is now happening in Tehran, thanks to the efforts of Irfan. I keep reminding my colleagues that you need to look at how in a country like Iran, in the past 50 years, people have been able to create infrastructures of dissent without relying on any kind of governmental funding or donations from wealthy people and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I think there is a kind of snobbishness, for lack of a better word, in the art of the West. And so we're talking about art. I don't talk about other categories, other areas. But in the art world, there's always this idea that the West is always more progressive and they come up with all the ideas first and the rest of the world copy them or follow in their footsteps. So I say to my colleagues, maybe now it's time for us to look elsewhere for inspiration. And Iran is a very, very good example. Sorry, this was not a question. This was just an idea that came to me after your beautiful comment to the last person. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. This is super important. This is also why I was mentioning, for example, the example of Slovenia, right? Because many places also in Eastern Europe have gone through, a lot of radical reactionary turns after 89 and have already, found ways, as you said, to organize infrastructures of dissent, etc., etc. And of course, these are not the only places in the world. There are other ones. And I totally agree with you that, many of these places are 15, 20 years ahead in the future. Relating to the West, which is behind, trying to play catch up, as it always told other people, that they are behind and that they should catch up. Now is the West's role to basically follow the lead of people who went through these kind of situations decades ago.
Thank you. So I just want to comment here as the guy sort of who came up with the idea of the summit, which is a sort of an alternative space that tries to defy the imposed boundaries on artists here. And one of the reasons that it is online because we cannot actually have you here, Hito. I would have loved that, but we can't. But at the same time, I want to listen to your ideas, So that's why me and Razor came up with the idea of like having this online annual event. And one important thing that I want to mention is that we have to the artists that come from the periphery, we must join forces. That's our only chance of survival, is this sense of collectivity. We cannot get to any point with canceling, with creating restrictions on each other, you know, or hating. Like, this is a Terra Summit, yes, but this wouldn't have been possible without the help of Una, without the help of Mo, the news center, without the help of Ghazal, without the help of all the people who participated, without the help of you, without the help of all the audience that are here tonight. We all together created legitimacy for the summit. You know? So yeah, that's the collectivities. It is very much important. Yeah. Any other comments, questions? Amir, again.
Thanks, man. I just wanted to like kind of echo what you said, as also being someone who's Iranian. I think it's also important for us to think, I mean, obviously solidarity is the thing, is the way to go forward into hell, as I forgot, John Berger would say. But I think it's also really important to be aware of, you know, internalizing the narratives that have been fed to us, right? As the colonized bodies, as the people we are. So it's kind of important for you, I think, also fun to think of the location of Tehran you picking and you doing it there, right? I think it's important to think about the planetarity of this problem and also think of why the constellation of stories are concentrated in Iran and Tehran right now. And like for you to bring this up, I think there is something about our sociality and how our cultures are made, which kind of begets the accidents, the phenomenons. And to get to that, like, consciousness might be the way to think of emergent humans that we can be, and kind of dismantle again as artists this idea of revolution that maybe it was never that, and maybe it's about the emergent every day. But yeah, thank you for putting this together regardless. This is awesome.
Thank you, Amir John. Other comments? Concerns? Right. Thank you so much, Hito.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. This was wonderful.
Absolutely. That's our honor of having you tonight with us. And really appreciate it. We really appreciate it. And thank everyone for joining tonight. I'll see you all tomorrow night at the ending, the last night of the Summit 03. Right. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.